63 years old, and I still sleep with one eye open. My late wife Marcia used to say that about me. Gavin Pierce. You'd hear a moth sneeze in a thunderstorm. She wasn't wrong. So when my phone buzzed at 12:04 a.m. on a Thursday in November, I was already half awake before the first ring died. We're in Raleigh, North Carolina. Mordecai neighborhood, one of those streets where the oak trees are older than the houses, and everybody knows your car by sound. Quiet street. Good bones. The kind of place where nothing happens. Except tonight. I looked at the screen. Dominic. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. My chest did something it hadn't done in years. My oldest boy hadn't called me after 9 p.m. since his mother's funeral. Dominic Pierce doesn't do late-night calls. He does 7 a.m. check-ins, birthday texts, 2 days early, and Christmas cards with a handwritten note inside like it's 1987. He is the most disciplined human being I have ever produced. And I say that as a man who spent 22 years as a shift supervisor at a paper mill and never once showed up late. I answered before the second buzz. Dom. Dad. His voice was flat, not panicked, worse than panicked, controlled. The way a man sounds when he's been rehearsing the call for a long time. Don't talk. Just listen. I need you to do exactly what I say, and I need you to do it right now. I sat up. Boy, it's midnight. Dad. Something in that one word sat me straight up like a board. I've heard Dominic use that tone exactly twice in my life. Once when he told me his mother's cancer had spread, once when he told me he was going to prison for something he didn't do. I'm listening, I said. Turn off every light in the house. Don't touch your laptop. Don't touch the router. Go upstairs to the attic. Lock the door from the inside. And Dad, he stopped. I could hear him breathing. Do not tell Tristan. The room went cold. Tristan Hale. My son-in-law. My daughter Delilah's husband of 9 years. The man who had been sleeping in the guest bedroom on the other side of my wall for the past 4 days because, and this is what he told me, his firm was doing renovations on their downtown Charlotte condo, and it was just more comfortable to stay at Dad's place for a few days. I'd believed him. I'd made the man pot roast. I'd let him drink my good bourbon. Dominic, I whispered, you're scaring me. Good, he said, and his voice cracked just slightly at the edge. Be scared, be quiet, and go. Now, I didn't ask another question. I moved through my house in the dark like a ghost I'd been practicing to become. 12 steps to the hallway, past the framed photos of the kids at Wrightsville Beach, past Marcia's cross-stitch that still hangs by the linen closet. Home is where the heart is, which I used to find corny and now find devastating. Up the narrow pull-down stairs to the attic, I locked the door, sat down on an old moving box labeled Marcia, winter clothes, and tried to remember how to breathe. I didn't know it yet, but I was sitting 3 feet above a secret that had been buried for 8 years. The attic in my house is a half-finished thing. Marcia always wanted to convert it into a reading room. Never happened. So it's insulation and old furniture and cardboard boxes and 2 round windows that face the backyard and let in just enough of the neighbor's porch light to see by. I've been up here maybe 4 times since she passed. I found a crack in the floorboards near the east wall. The boards had warped from a leak we fixed 2 summers ago, and I pressed my eye to it out of instinct more than intention. The guest bedroom below me was dark. Then the lamp clicked on. Tristan Hale was standing in the middle of the room in his undershirt and slacks, looking at his watch. He looked exactly like what he'd always looked like to me, a man assembled from a catalog. Neat, purposeful, the kind of handsome that never quite reaches his eyes. He worked in private equity, or that's what he told people at parties. Capital allocation and asset restructuring. I used to joke that I needed a translator to have dinner with my own son-in-law. Delilah would laugh. Tristan would smile like he was doing me a favor. He crossed to the far side of the room, the corner where I keep an old armoire that belonged to Marcia's mother. He moved it. Not struggle with it. Moved it. Like he'd done it before. Like he knew exactly how much it weighed. Underneath it was a section of hardwood floor that looked identical to the rest. Except Tristan reached down and pressed 2 fingers along the baseboard, and a panel lifted clean. And underneath that panel was a safe. I want you to understand something. I have lived in this house for 26 years. I built 2 of those rooms with my own hands. I know every creak in this floor, every soft spot in the drywall, every light switch that sticks in the rain. I did not know that safe existed. How long, I thought. How long has that been there? I watched Tristan spin the dial. Left, right, left. He had it open in under 20 seconds. He reached inside and pulled out a folder. Thick, rubber banded. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened it, and from the angle of the lamplight through that crack I could see what was on top. A document. Official looking. Lots of text and at the bottom signatures. I couldn't read it from where I was sitting, but the header was visible enough. Last Will and Testament, and below it, in smaller print, Marcia Elaine Piercy. My hands stopped working for a moment. Marcia had a will. Of course she did. We drew it up together in 2009 with an attorney on Glenwood Avenue. I watched it get signed. I have a copy in my filing cabinet downstairs in a green folder labeled Important in Marcia's handwriting. The estate got settled 2 years after she passed, split between Dominic, Delilah, and me, with a small disbursement to Sienna, Delilah's college roommate and godmother to their kids, who Marcia had loved like a niece. That was the will. That was the only will. I was there. So what was Tristan Hale doing pulling a document out of a hidden safe in my house at 12:17 in the morning? I pressed my eye so hard to that crack I could feel the wood grain on my cheekbone. He turned a page, then another. Then he stopped, pulled out his phone, and started photographing pages. Calm, methodical. Like a man finishing a task he'd started a long time ago. He's been in this house for 4 days, I thought, and he waited until he was sure I was asleep. Dominic had said don't tell Tristan. Not be careful. Not there might be a situation. Don't. Tell. Tristan. Like a man who knew exactly what he was walking into. Like a man who had been building toward this specific night. I sat back against the wall in the dark, and I did the math. Dominic went to prison 8 years ago, charged with federal wire fraud, evidence that came from nowhere, a case that moved impossibly fast, a public defender that Dominic refused because he knew something was wrong with the whole shape of it. He served 22 months in Butner Federal, came out quieter than he went in, got his record partially expunged, somehow, I still don't fully know how, landed back on his feet, then joined the FBI. I always thought that last part was Dominic being Dominic, turning pain into purpose. Marcia would have cried at the badge ceremony if she'd lived to see it. But sitting in that attic, listening to Tristan Hale photograph a will that should not exist, I started to think that maybe Dominic hadn't joined the FBI out of inspiration. Maybe he joined it out of intention. I didn't know it yet, but my son had spent 8 years hunting the man sleeping in my guest bedroom, and I'd been making that man pot roast. The lamp clicked off below me. I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there in the dark with Marcia's winter coats, and the smell of cedar, and something that felt a lot like the ground shifting under everything I thought I knew. One thought kept circling back, quiet and sharp as a blade. Tristan Hale is about to have the worst anniversary dinner of his life. I just didn't know yet how right I was. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. Dawn in Mordecai doesn't announce itself. It just quietly replaces the dark gray bleeding into the oak trees, the neighbor's porch light clicking off, the first bird making noise like it has something to prove. I'd been in that attic for 4 hours. My knees were telling me about every one of them. It was Friday morning. 4:47 a.m. I hadn't slept. Hadn't moved much either. Just sat there on that box of Marcia's winter clothes, back against the wall, running the same math over and over, like the answer was going to change if I just tried it one more time. It didn't change. My phone buzzed. One vibration. A text from Dominic. Still up there? I typed back. Where else would I be? 3 dots. Then, come down. Side door. Leave the lights off. He's here, I thought. He drove through the night. Dominic's car, a gray Chevy Tahoe that looked like every other gray Chevy Tahoe in the federal government's fleet, was parked 2 houses down on Elm Street with the engine off. I slipped out the side door in my house slippers, like a man who had completely lost control of his own life, crossed the yard in the November cold, and got in the passenger side. My son looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, which I would later learn was accurate. He was 38 years old, and he looked 45, and he looked more like his mother than he ever had. Same jawline, same eyes that didn't waste time on anything that didn't matter. He was in dark civilian clothes, no badge visible, no bureau windbreaker. Just Dominic. Just my boy. sitting in the dark with a file folder on his lap thick enough to choke a horse. I looked at him for a long moment. Pot roast, I said. He blinked. What? I made that man pot roast, Dominic. I let him drink my Blantons. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile. The memory of one. I know, Dad. You could have called me sooner. I couldn't. He said it quietly, and I heard the weight in it. The legal weight, the procedural weight, the 8 years of waiting weight. Not until I had the physical evidence. Everything before tonight was circumstantial. I needed him to go for the safe. I turned to face him fully. You knew about the safe. I've known about the safe for 14 months. The cold outside had nothing on the feeling that settled into my chest right then. Talk, I said. He talked. He talked for 41 minutes, and I did not interrupt him once, which, if you know me, is the closest thing to a miracle Raleigh, North Carolina has ever produced. It started the way all the worst things start, with money. Marcia's estate hadn't been enormous. The house, a life insurance policy, a savings account she'd built quietly over 30 years by clipping coupons and never once buying anything full price. Combined value, somewhere north of $400,000. Not generational wealth, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough for somebody to want more of it than they were supposed to get. The original will, the one I watched Marcia sign on a Tuesday afternoon in 2009 in the law office on Glenwood Avenue while I held her hand, because she'd just finished her second round of chemo, and her handwriting shook, divided everything 3 ways. Equal shares to Dominic, Delilah, and me, with a $15,000 disbursement to Sienna, who Marcia had loved since the day Delilah brought her home from UNC's sophomore year. That was the will. The will that got used to settle the estate was different. Dominic's share had been reduced to a token amount, $8,000, with the remainder folded into Delilah's portion, meaning Tristan's portion, meaning the man who had engineered the whole thing walked away with what should have been my son's inheritance, while my son was sitting in Butner Federal Correctional Institution for a crime he did not commit. How? I said. Just the one word. He had a contact at the law firm, Dominic said, a paralegal who got paid to swap the documents before filing. The original got buried. We think Tristan kept it as insurance, proof that he knew what the real will said, in case anyone ever challenged the estate. Insurance against who? Against Delilah. He said it carefully, in case she ever turned on him. I sat with that. Tristan Hale had kept a document that could destroy him as Alicia, my daughter. I filed that thought in the back of my mind, in a folder labeled Things I Will Deal With Later, so I don't put my fist through this dashboard right now. And the wire fraud charge, I said. Dominic exhaled slowly through his nose. Fabricated. Tristan had a college friend at a mid-sized brokerage in Charlotte. They constructed a paper trail, fake transactions, shell accounts, that pointed directly at me. Filed an anonymous tip with the SEC. It moved to DOJ in 6 weeks. He paused. I want you to understand how clean it was, Dad, how thought out. This wasn't impulse. He planned this before he proposed to Delilah. That last sentence landed like a brick through a window. Before he proposed. Tristan Hale had mapped out the destruction of my son's life as a prerequisite to marrying my daughter. He'd sat across from me at my kitchen table and asked for Delilah's hand with a plan already in motion to send her brother to prison. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment something shifted in me permanently, like a bone that sets wrong. You can't unfeel it. Why didn't you tell me any of this, I asked, after you got out, after you joined the bureau? Why did I have to find out in an attic at midnight? Dominic turned to look at me for the first time since he'd started talking. Because you would have gone to Delilah. Silence. And Delilah would have gone to Tristan. More silence. And Tristan would have run. I finished. Or worse, Dominic said. He had leverage, Dad. On the paralegal, on his contact at the brokerage, on at least 2 other people connected to this. If he felt the walls closing in early, people could have gotten hurt. I needed him comfortable. I needed him walking around thinking he'd won. And the safe, we've had the house under intermittent surveillance for 8 months. We knew he accessed it during a visit last Easter. We just couldn't get eyes inside without a warrant, and we couldn't get a warrant without probable cause that wasn't derived from the surveillance. He almost smiled, so we waited for him to come to us. You used my house as bait, I said. I used his greed as bait, Dominic said. Your house was just where his greed lived. I wanted to be angry at him. I tried on the anger, checked the fit. It didn't sit right. Because underneath everything, underneath the 4 hours in the attic and the pot roast and the Blantons, and 22 months of visiting my son in a federal facility and watching him walk out the other side quiet, in a way he'd never fully recovered from. Underneath all of it was something that felt, God help me, like pride. My boy had done this right. What happens now? I asked. Dominic reached into the file folder on his lap and pulled out a photograph, slid it across to me. I held it up to the gray morning light coming through the windshield. It was an invitation, cream cardstock, gold lettering. I recognized Delilah's handwriting in the return address. Tristan and Delilah Hale, 9th anniversary dinner Saturday, November 14th, 7 p.m. Brasserie La Croix, downtown Raleigh, tomorrow night. We're going to let him enjoy his appetizer, Dominic said. I looked at my son, and then he took the invitation back and slid it into the folder with the care of a man handling something sacred, and then we ended. I nodded slowly, looked out the windshield at my house, my oak trees, my porch, 26 years of my life sitting there in the November gray. Sienna's coming to that dinner, I said. It wasn't a question. Delilah had mentioned it 2 days ago. Sienna's flying in from Atlanta. It's going to be so fun. Dad, you should come. I'd said maybe. I'd had no idea what maybe was going to turn into. Dominic glanced at me sideways. She's already been briefed. My eyebrows went up. Sienna knows? I wanted to be angry at him. I tried on the anger. Checked the fit. It didn't sit right. Because underneath everything, underneath the 4 hours in the attic and the pot roast and the Blantons, and 22 months of visiting my son in a federal facility and watching him walk out the other side, quiet in a way he'd never fully recovered from. Underneath all of it was something that felt, God help me, like pride. My boy had done this right. What happens now? I asked. Dominic reached into the file folder on his lap and pulled out a photograph, slid it across to me. I held it up to the gray morning light coming through the windshield. It was an invitation, cream cardstock, gold lettering. I recognized Delilah's handwriting in the return address. Tristan and Delilah Hale, 9th anniversary dinner Saturday, November 14th, 7 p.m., Brasserie La Croix, downtown Raleigh. Tomorrow night, we're going to let him enjoy his appetizer, Dominic said. I looked at my son, and then he took the invitation back and slid it into the folder with the care of a man handling something sacred, and then we ended. I nodded slowly, looked out the windshield at my house, my oak trees, my porch, 26 years of my life sitting there in the November gray. Sienna's coming to that dinner, I said. It wasn't a question. Delilah had mentioned it 2 days ago. Sienna's flying in from Atlanta. It's going to be so fun. Dad, you should come. I'd said maybe. I'd had no idea what maybe was going to turn into. Dominic glanced at me sideways. She's already been briefed. My eyebrows went up. Sienna? Knows. Sienna, he said, has known for 6 months. She's been helping us verify documents. She remembered details about Mom's original will that we couldn't get from the paper trail alone. I thought about Sienna. Sharp, quiet, the kind of woman who remembered everything and revealed nothing. Marcia had always said she was the most trustworthy person Delilah had ever brought home. Marcia, as usual, had been right. I didn't know it yet, but Sienna had one more role to play before this was over, and it wasn't going to be quiet. Go get some sleep, Dad, Dominic said. Tomorrow night's going to be a long one. I got out of the car, stood on the sidewalk in my house slippers in the November cold, looked back at him through the window. Dom, I said. He looked up. She knew, didn't she? Your mother. She knew something was wrong with Tristan. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he reached over and put the Tahoe in drive. Get some sleep, Dad. He pulled away before I could ask again. And maybe that was its own answer. I walked back into my house, past Marcia's cross-stitch, home is where the heart is, and stood in the kitchen in the gray morning light. Somewhere down the hall, Tristan Hale was asleep in my guest bedroom, dreaming whatever it is that men like him dream about. Tomorrow he'd be having dinner with his wife, his colleagues, and the pastor who'd married them. I was going to be there. And this time, I wasn't making anybody pot roast. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. Some men spend their whole lives waiting for justice and die before it arrives. I was not going to be one of those men. Saturday, November 14th. I woke up at 7 a.m. and made myself a full breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, the works. Because my mother always said you should never do anything important on an empty stomach. Tristan came downstairs at 8:15 in his robe, looking rested and unbothered, and asked if there was any coffee left. I smiled and poured him a cup. Enjoy it, I thought. Last one you'll drink as a free man. He sat at my kitchen table, Marcia's kitchen table, the one she picked out from a furniture store on Capitol Boulevard in 2003, and scrolled his phone with the casual confidence of a man who believed he had won. And why wouldn't he? He'd been winning for 8 years. He'd sent my son to prison. He'd stolen my wife's inheritance. He'd slept in my house, eaten my food, drunk my bourbon, and sat in my church pew at Christmas with his arm around my daughter like he belonged there. Big night tonight, he said without looking up from his phone. Sure is, I said. Delilah's been planning this dinner for months. You coming? I turned from the counter and looked at him. I would not miss it for the world, Tristan. He finally looked up. Something moved across his face, just a flicker, barely a quarter second, like a man who heard a sound he couldn't identify. Then it was gone, and the smile came back, assembled and polished. Good, he said. Should be a great night. Brasserie La Croix sat on the corner of Fayetteville and Cabarrus in downtown Raleigh. The kind of restaurant where the menu didn't list prices because if you needed to know the price, you probably shouldn't be there. Dark wood, candlelight, white tablecloths so starched they could stand up on their own. The kind of place Tristan loved because it had an audience built right in. I arrived at 6:45. Dominic had told me to be early. The dining room was already half full. I spotted the reserved section in the back. A long table, 8 chairs, flowers in the center, a handwritten place card at each setting. Delilah had done all of it herself. My daughter had spent weeks planning a celebration for a man who had been planning her family's destruction, before he'd ever put a ring on her finger. I sat down, ordered water, and waited. Sienna arrived at 6:52, in a burgundy dress and the expression of a woman who had been carrying a secret for 6 months, and was about ready to put it down. She spotted me, crossed the room, and sat beside me without a word, just reached over and squeezed my hand once. You okay? She asked. Ask me in an hour, I said. She almost smiled. Marcia would have loved this. Marcia, I said, would have gotten here an hour early and already had the manager briefed. That got a real smile, brief and sad and true. The rest of the table filled in by 7:05. 2 couples from Tristan's firm. I'd met them at Christmas parties over the years. Nice enough people who had no idea what they'd walked into tonight. Pastor Gerald Webb, who had married Tristan and Delilah 9 years ago, at First Baptist on Hillsborough Street. A man so decent it almost hurt to look at him. And then Delilah, in a green dress that made her look like her mother, laughing at something Tristan said as they walked in together. She looked happy. That's going to complicate things, I thought. That's going to complicate things considerably. Tristan worked the table like a politician. Handshakes, backslaps, the easy laugh he deployed like a tool. He topped off everyone's wine before the waiter could get to it. He told a story about a golf trip that had everybody leaning in. He was magnetic in the way that certain dangerous things are magnetic, the way a fire is magnetic. You lean toward it right up until it burns you. He sat at the other end. We made eye contact once. He raised his glass slightly in my direction. I raised mine back. Enjoy the appetizer, I thought. Dominic said you'd enjoy the appetizer. The appetizers came and went. The bread, the salads. The table was warm with wine and candlelight, and 9 years of Delilah believing she'd married a good man. Pastor Webb was telling a story about their wedding day. I've done 400 ceremonies, and I've never seen a groom so calm, so composed. Composed, I thought. Yeah. Because he'd already won by then. My phone buzzed under the table. A text from Dominic. 2 minutes. I set my phone face down on the table, picked up my water glass, took a slow sip. Sienna beside me had gone very still. The main course arrived. Tristan was mid-sentence about something. A deal his firm had closed, some asset restructuring in the Carolinas. The kind of story that was really just a wealth display with narrative clothing. When the front door of Brasserie La Croix opened, Dominic Pierce walked in. He was in a suit, dark navy, white shirt, no tie. Behind him were 2 people I didn't know, a woman in a blazer, a man in a gray jacket, and they moved through the restaurant the way people move when they have absolute authority and zero interest in making it comfortable for anyone. The room didn't stop, not all at once. It was gradual, The way a conversation dies when something enters a space that doesn't belong. A table near the door went quiet first. Then another. Then the couple from Tristan's firm facing the entrance looked up and their expressions did something complicated. Tristan had his back to the door. Delilah saw Dominic first. Her face opened up. Dom. Oh my gosh, you came. I didn't know you were. And then she saw the two people behind him, and her voice tapered off like a radio losing signal. Dominic walked the length of that dining room without looking at anyone but Tristan. Tristan turned around slowly, like a man who had heard that sound again, the one he couldn't identify, and this time knew exactly what it was. The composed man, the calm groom. He looked at my son, and for just one moment, one pure, unguarded, expensive moment, I watched 9 years of carefully constructed confidence leave his face completely. There you are, I thought. There's the real one. Dominic stopped at the head of the table. He looked down at Tristan Hale with the patience of a man who had been waiting 8 years for this exact moment and was in absolutely no hurry now that it had arrived. Tristan Allen Hale, he said, quiet, controlled. You're under arrest for wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and tampering with a legal instrument. The table went to stone. You have the right to remain silent. He'd found something. Not all of it, but something. A thin layer of composure. Just enough to speak with. What are you doing? This is a private dinner. This is my anniversary. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Dominic. Tristan's voice dropped. He leaned forward slightly, and for a half second I saw the real calculation happen behind his eyes. How much does he have? Can I negotiate this? Is there a play here? Let's be adults about this. Whatever you think you know. I have the original will, Tristan. Silence. Complete. Total. The kind of silence that has weight. I have the safe contents, the photographs you took Thursday night, the testimony of the paralegal at Ketterman and Associates, who your attorney paid $22,000 in 2015, and 8 years of financial records connecting you to the shell accounts used to fabricate the wire fraud case against me. Dominic tilted his head slightly. I also have your college roommate, who by the way sends his regards from his current location, which is federal custody in Charlotte. Tristan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The woman in the blazer stepped around from behind Dominic with a pair of handcuffs, and Tristan Hale stood up from the head of that table. From the anniversary dinner my daughter had spent weeks planning, with the white tablecloth and the candles and the pastor who'd called him the calmest groom he'd ever seen, and he stood up and he looked across the table at me. Just me. Like he was finally understanding something. I looked back at him, and I did not smile and I did not say a word. I just held his gaze steady and even, and let him read whatever he needed to read in it. You sat at my table, I thought. You drank my bourbon. You ate my pot roast and you slept in my house. And you put my son in a cage. And you stole from my dead wife and you looked me in the eye every single time like I was the fool in the room. I was not the fool in the room. The handcuffs clicked. Pastor Webb made a sound. One of the couples from the firm, the wife, pushed back from the table like the chair had become hot. Delilah had not moved, had not made a sound. She was sitting perfectly still in her green dress, with both hands flat on the white tablecloth, and her face was doing something I had no name for, and did not want to look at too long. That part, I had known, was going to be the hardest part. Dominic's colleagues walked Tristan toward the door. He didn't fight, didn't shout. The composure was back, just barely, just enough, and I think that was the most honest thing about him. Even at the end, the performance didn't fully stop. At the door he paused, turned back one more time. He looked at Delilah. She looked at her hands. He walked out. The restaurant stayed quiet for what felt like a long time but was probably 45 seconds. Then somebody's fork clinked against a plate, and the world remembered how to move again. Dominic came back to the table, sat down in Tristan's chair at the head, looked at Delilah. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry, which surprised me. Then again, she was Marcia's daughter. How long? 8 years of building it. 6 months of knowing enough to move. The will, she said. Flat. Mom's real will. Yes. She nodded once, very slowly, like a woman filing something away in a place she'd deal with later. And my share goes back to what Mom intended, Dominic said. Equal. All of it. Sienna's disbursement too. Delilah looked down the table at Sienna. Something passed between them. A whole conversation in a single look, the kind that women who've been friends since they were 19 years old can have without a single word. Then Delilah looked at me. "Daddy," she said, and her voice broke on exactly that one word and no others. I got up from my end of the table and walked to her and put my arms around her the way I had when she was 7 years old and scared of thunderstorms, and she held on with both hands. "I've got you," I said. "I've always got you." She cried exactly once, quietly, briefly. Then she straightened up, wiped her face with the white linen napkin, and looked at the untouched main course in front of her. "Is the food good here?" she asked. I blinked. "What? The food. Is it good? Because I picked this restaurant and I've never actually eaten here and I would like to eat something." I sat back down, looked at my son, looked at Sienna, looked at Pastor Webb, who had the expression of a man who had just watched 8 years of a sermon write itself. "Somebody flagged down the waiter," I said, and we ate. 3 weeks later, I came downstairs on a Tuesday morning and made coffee and stood at my kitchen window looking at the oak trees in the yard. The November cold had turned into December cold. The trees were bare. The neighborhood was quiet the way Mordecai is always quiet. On the counter was a green folder, Marcia's handwriting on the tab. Important. I'd moved it up from the filing cabinet the night before, set it there so I'd see it in the morning. Inside was the copy of the original will. Not a photocopy, not a document image, but the real thing, restored and certified and filed correctly with the court at last. Marcia's actual words, her actual intentions. The version where my son wasn't erased. The version where nobody rewrote her choices while she was too sick to defend them. I put my hand flat on the folder. "Got him, Marcia," I said to the kitchen, to the cross-stitch on the wall, to the woman who'd heard a moth sneeze in a thunderstorm and loved us all more than we probably deserved. Took us a while, but we got him. The coffee finished brewing. Outside, the first bird of the morning made noise like it had something to prove. I poured myself a cup, and for the first time in 8 years, it tasted like it was supposed to. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.